Great, so you may have just heard the announcement from the loudspeakers in the sky that this is going to be recorded. Please press continue if you are comfortable with that. If not, please feel free to turn off your camera, mute your microphone, or even leave the meeting if you have to. We completely understand. So you should have been able to confirm that you are being recorded at this point. So I'm going to now stop sharing my screen. Great, and just welcome everyone in person. We're so glad that you're here. So this is actually the second part of a 2-hour event that we've hosted today. So you're entering, if you're here for the second part, you're here for the panel discussion. A lot of you continued on from the peer exchange that happened earlier. That was a really exciting space that we held for the first hour. And that was we had close to 80 communities from across the Commonwealth to come together and share lessons learned from their shared streets programs. So I do want to actually invite the peer exchange participants to share anything they learned at this point in the chat with people who are joining us for the panel discussion. I think that could be, I would personally love to hear that. And I'm sure that people joining us now would love to hear that. My name is Jen Kaplan. I'm an economic development planner at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. Today's event is hosted in a partnership between MAPC, MassDOT, and the Solomon Foundation. And we're really excited that you're here today. We titled this event Looking Back, Looking Forward. And that's because we know that as we enter this year, that many of the same challenges that persisted that may have gone towards creating shared streets and spaces in your communities will continue onward. And they're still there, they still persist. So what can we learn from those shared streets programs as we enter this new year and continue to tackle those challenges? Today's agenda is going to be that we'll be kicking things off with a panel discussion moderated by the great Kate Fichter, Assistant Secretary for Policy Coordination at MassDOT, and she's going to introduce our communities. And then at about 4:40, we're going to open things up to an audience Q&A. So at that point, we will invite you to raise your hand Zoom style. We'll go over how to do that so that you can ask questions of the panelists or even put your questions into the chat. So without further ado, I am going to turn things over to Kate so that she can introduce herself and the panelists and dive right into our questions.
Thank you so much, Jen, and thank you to everybody for joining us here at the end of the day, both some of our municipal folks who participated in the earlier peer exchange and everybody else who has decided to come to hear the panel today. Some of you may have heard me say this before, but Shared Streets has just been an amazing experience, professionally, personally, organizationally. There is so much interest in it, and it seems to be such a happy ray of sunshine in an otherwise very, very challenging year. So I am always thrilled when a lot of people come out to talk about it because it seems to be consistently a popular topic. As Jen said, my name is Kate Fichter, and I am an Assistant Secretary at MassDOT, and I also have the privilege and honor of running the Shared Streets program for MassDOT, which many of you have participated in one way or another or are aware of. If you are not, I am more than happy to share information, and there are lots of people on this call who can tell you more about it. But we are really, really happy to be part of this whole movement and happy to be here today. We have folks from 4 different municipalities, all of whom have been deeply involved in shared streets. I am mostly going to be quiet and let them share their stories with us. The idea was to dig a little deeper into some somewhat representative, somewhat quirky, as we all are, towns experiences, and then share questions and comments together before the 5 o'clock hour. So I will introduce our panelists as we go. We decided to do it alphabetically for lack of any better way to do it. So I'm actually going to start with Ben Cares, who's a senior planner in Chelsea and who I know I've spoken with in the past. So Ben, take it away.
Great, thank you so much, Kate. Yep, I'm the senior planner here for the Department of Housing and Community Development for the City of Chelsea. This particular grant opportunity enabled us to do some really effective, quick build pedestrian and bicyclist safety improvements, and also accentuate one of our, I think, current pride and joys, which is our downtown bus and bike lane. So the funding actually allowed us to continue specifically the bike infrastructure just after that bus and bike lane terminated, where the MBTA buses would otherwise not traverse. They would turn off from downtown Broadway, which is one of our denser and commercial districts in Chelsea. So basically within the downtown Broadway area and some of the arterials that would feed into it and out of it, we were able to implement some really effective pavement marking schemes, as well as some sort of temporary, but I would argue somewhat permanent improvements to the area, specifically for pedestrians and bicyclists. Those also included rapid flashing beacon signs, new signage, the replacement of some pedestrian infrastructure, and coincidentally, a lot of the downtown Broadway area and adjacent areas overlap with our safe routes to school. For those of you that are not familiar with that, those are just pathways that have been cited as really common foot travel access ways to local schools and other sort of academic institutions. So it was very, I guess, interdisciplinary, and we were able to satisfy a lot of the major pedestrian and bicyclist issues in our downtown Broadway area, as well as some of the adjacent areas through the grant program. And so, I know there's two questions we're supposed to really talk about, which is what was the greatest achievement? What could we have done differently? I would say that the best thing that we did was probably that continuation of the bike lane just after the bus and bike lane in downtown Broadway. We are a pretty major linkage, I would say, for a lot of people commuting to the downtown Boston area, specifically from East Boston, because there is no other way unless you hop on the Blue Line with your bike, but that's got to be outside peak hours. So that and its sort of complementary nature to our other bike lanes really helped to sort of really build out our bike infrastructure in the downtown area. And with the advent of blue bikes coming to Chelsea as well, it really just complemented itself and worked sort of in tandem. I would say that although we were able to sort of use the funding for these really quick build temporary solutions that allayed a lot of pedestrian and bicyclist issues, how we could have done it differently, given I think different circumstances, is probably had a more robust community outreach and engagement model as a part of the grant process. But given the really quick turnaround time, that was pretty difficult. You see a lot of other municipalities like Chelsea rolling out these quick fixes. And oftentimes it's difficult to kind of go through that bottom-up approach with planning because community engagement, it takes time, it takes willingness, and when people are otherwise preoccupied with the fallout of a pandemic, it makes it really difficult. But it doesn't mean that we should not engage in those arenas and sort of allow those to dictate how we expend funds that we secure through state entities or otherwise. So that's my brief sort of synopsis about our project. So yeah, I would say it was a success. We solved a lot of issues and we did it in a really quick turnaround time. And we are really grateful to MassDOT and their partners for allowing us to sort of embark on that.
Thank you so much, Ben. And I believe that one of the Chelsea projects was in our very first round of grants. So super happy to see you here today. And Ben, of course, reminded me that I failed in my primary goal as to moderator, which was to tell you the two discussion questions that people have. One of which is basically like, tell us something that went well, and one of which is tell us something that you would do differently. So having corrected that, I am going to turn the virtual stage to Wayne, Director of Planning and Sustainability from the City of Northampton, who I see right below me in my box.
So I know that when Kate said that some of us are quirky, she was looking right at me.
No, I'm looking at all of us, I swear.
So, I mean, ours may have had some of the most mixed record in the Commonwealth. As part of our project was seen as an incredible success. I think people are really proud of and we're planning to replicate as soon as the snow melts in the spring. And part of it was an abject failure that we've learned lessons from. So I can, talk about both those things. We started on sort of about 25% of Main Street with a shared streets project before the MassDOT program. So we had support from BAR and from Solomon Foundation. That's the portion of Main Street that's already 2 lanes and that a majority of our restaurants are in. And that project was fabulously successful. We narrowed the street, although we didn't lose any lanes because there's already 2 lanes. We lost about 2/3 of the parking, and we created outdoor dining, and we're still convinced we kept restaurants alive that couldn't have survived this year. And that there were, there was certainly there were some retailers in between the restaurants, and we hate taking sides and who survives and who doesn't. And the retailers felt like we're losing parking and that helps the restaurants, but doesn't necessarily help them. But nonetheless, that first part of the project was really successful. We then, with MassDOT help, took over the other 3/4 of Main Street, which is currently 2 lanes in each direction. And that's the part that was much more controversial. Much of the project, though, was a great success, I think. So the entire project remained in place for a month, but elements of it are permanent elements were a great success. And I think our failures, as it were, gave us bad, people don't realize all the successful parts. So some of the successful things for us is just at the administrative side. Our city council passed what we refer to as the War Powers Act, where they basically said, Mayor, you can do anything you need. And that let us be really very nimble. So if the retailer said, hey, we're losing parking to the restaurants, can you give us 15-minute parking? We were out there within a day changing parking spots in front of the retailers to 15-minute parking. And our license commission was willing to meet once a month and was willing to authorize the staffer to make decisions. The mayor, his chief of staff, my office, DPW, were on the phone every couple of days to respond immediately to what people wanted. We were open to everything from some part, it wasn't only streets for us, streets, sidewalks, parks, parking lots. We were sort of open to all those areas. So the administrative part, I think, was a big success. Some of the permanent elements for us, so whether it's smart signs to our parking garage or planters or having 30 people out painting bollards to get art out there, all those parts were really successful. And I think the part that maybe was most mixed was the community reaction. We had sort of extremes. We're working on what we call a shared street, a complete streets and steroids project, a sort of a 5-year project for how do we do permanent shared streets in downtown. And I think that was the subcontext for both some of the support for the project and the opposition. So the bicyclists, pedestrians, a lot of community really loved the project. All the volunteers who came and painted the blocks were really excited about it. We had more social media attention than we had in a long time for all the positive elements. But the merchant, the business community by and large did not like the expansion. The specific restaurants who benefited it were supporters. But I think our biggest challenge, and maybe the thing we would do differently, was we had a lot of unprogrammed space. And I think originally we thought we could program the space, but with the COVID restrictions, we really couldn't. We couldn't put out tables. We wanted to make sure that not all of downtown was privatized. So originally we thought, well, we'll put out some tables away from restaurants, and if you go to a takeout place, you can go sit there. But we really couldn't do that in the end because of COVID restrictions. So some of the merchants saw that we were losing real estate they wanted for parking and losing real estate for roads. But when that real estate sat empty, they didn't see the benefit. So the Lower Main Street project was a success because every inch that we took over was automatically programmed. The rest of Main Street was less successful because it wasn't programmed. So I think if we were doing it over again, the lesson we would do is maybe still aiming to the same direction, but maybe trying to think about doing it in phases, right? Expanding as the spaces get occupied, but not trying to expand all at once. I'd like to say that if we did it over again, it's more community engagement, but I'm not sure we could have, given both the time schedule and frankly, given the fact that we did do some community engagement on the Lower Main Street and people were excited about the process, but clearly something didn't work. And so we need to address that process. I guess that's a good quick overview.
Thank you so much, Wayne. And it's interesting. I happen to be in Northampton with my family and what turned out to be the last couple of days of the pieces that ultimately got moved around. And I can imagine that it was a painful process out there, but it actually was, for us, it was instructive about the limitations in some places of moving very quickly. We made very intentional choices around how we were going to handle requirements for public process, which was basically like not at all, which is very atypical. And I'm happy to talk about that more in the Q&A if people are interested. But I think as Northampton is in no way a blot on our shared streets experience. I think actually we have a lot to learn from you, and I really commend you guys for what you did. So next, I will turn to Chief Galvin from Berlin to speak about your experiences, please.
Thank you. I think one thing you'll probably notice is a little different about me than the other panelists is I'm not a planner. I don't work for a planning department, and I think that makes us a little bit different in our project. But I think what you'll see is some of the outcomes are very similar. Our project was a little bit more rural than what you've heard. We did a project in about a 1 block area of our town center involving 3 streets. We created some temporary one-ways, added temporary bike lanes, temporary sidewalks, as well as incorporated some seating. Much less of a business district than the other projects you've heard about. We have a small general store, coffee shop, a community center, our public library, as well as a couple of other town buildings that unfortunately because of COVID are being underutilized. And what we were hoping to do was kind of going from 3 other projects that we have, Safe Routes to School. You've heard that already, Complete Streets. And we have we're in the beginnings of a village center planning project as well. So this allowed us to incorporate ideas from all 3 of those projects and to kind of see what would work. And as we move forward to come up with something permanent for kind of our village center. One thing that's nice about our community is we have that kind of quintessential New England feel town center. And we're trying to maintain that, but we're on Route 62 with a lot of commuter traffic every day. So we're trying to find some balance in that. And this allowed us to begin that and to see what we can do as we move forward to make that happen. One of the, I guess the pitfalls we ran into is what you've heard is community engagement. We noticed with a lot of our older residents that they didn't get the notifications that we had sent out. So when we initially had our community meetings, they were poorly attended. But all of a sudden, once the project went up, there was a lot of feedback from the community. And so we definitely learned that we needed to do a better job of reaching out to the community beforehand to let them know what was going to happen. And but in the end, the discussions that it sparked, as much as I would say about 50% of our feedback was negative. And it wasn't necessarily negative to the project. It was negative to change and negative to changing the feel of our town center. And that's what some of the project did. And but what it did spark, as much as those people that spoke out against the project were against change, when it came to the Route 62 corridor, they had a lot of ideas and some things that they'd like to see implemented in that area, and some things that take advantage of technology. So almost it went against what they were saying for the smaller side roads off of the project, but it showed that there was a lot of willingness and to change when it came to the main commuting thoroughfare. And that's what we're going to have to look at as we look at future projects and look at some other things that may come available to us in the future. The other thing that kind of became negative is we got to this late. We were really rushing to get an application in at the end of in October to start a pilot in mid-November to try and get this done before the snow flies. So that became a challenge to us. We really didn't get to see the impact of the seating and the outdoor seating areas that we installed because of weather. One positive that did actually come out of that going late is that we had created some temporary traffic islands. We had narrowed some roads and done some things, and we had a snowstorm. So the DPW had to plow and actually do some maintenance around this. So we were able to show that worked, as part of the project, because there were some concerns about what would happen with snow removal if there were to become a permanent project. But I think as we look at it and as we move forward, it gave us a lot to discuss as a community. And and as we look at really at implementing a village center project down the road, gave us some great ideas as we're going to move forward.
Thank you so much. One of the really great things about having Chief Galvin be part of this discussion is that he represents the really large number of small and rural communities that have participated in this program, which is often not the case with our grant programs. That we recognize that the barrier to entry for a lot of what we do is pretty high, and it can be tough for the smaller communities just to have the capacity or the staff or the time to put all of the application materials together. So we really tried intentionally to make this something that was accessible as broadly as possible, and have been really, really excited and pleased to see just the broad breadth of types of municipalities and size of municipalities that have participated. So I would love to talk about that if there is time. Last but not least, it's my pleasure to introduce Katrina O'Leary, a planner for Middleton.
Thank you. For those of you who aren't aware where Middleton is, we're above Danvers and below North Andover on Route 114. We've got about 10,000 people. And our project was to build the first phase of our rail trail that we've been working on for over 10 years. We've met problems along the way. And the biggest hurdle was obtaining the right to actually use the rail trail as a rail trail, because it was now owned by the Middleton Electric Light Department. But because this grant opportunity came up, that became the catalyst that just pushed everything so that it all happened at once. And now I'm hoping that we'll have the rail trail built in the next 3 years. Things are moving so quickly. So that's one really good thing that came about from this. Then I agree, this is definitely something that was easier to apply for a smaller town. I mean, I've worked for cities, I've worked for larger communities where you have, you assign different tasks. I'm at Middleton. I'm dealing with the planning board, ZBA, master plan committee, all these different boards. I'm doing everything. And so this is just an extra thing. You know, it's kind of like when you see this grant opportunity come up, I'm like, should we apply for it? You know, and what should we apply for? And it just so happened that the rail trail, although it didn't seem originally that this was kind of made for that type of thing, it just hit all the goals and objectives of the program. And in retrospect, it's right next to our school, and our schools was one of the few schools that opted to open in September. And, you know, just seeing all the cars lined up, dropping off their kids, if we had applied just a little bit earlier, they would have been able to drop them off at the end of the rail trail and they could walk right up. But I'm hoping next year they'll be able to do that. And so that kids will be able to walk to school when the weather gets nicer. So I think that was the biggest success of the program, is that it was a catalyst for our rail trail. And we're actively, you know, working on the grant application with the help of Stantec for phase 2 of the rail trail right now. And hopefully we'll be submitting a Mass Trails grant too for design of phase 3 on February 2nd. Things we would have done differently. I did hold development review group meetings. I held the transportation task force meeting all via Zoom beforehand. Having your department head sitting there not saying anything isn't the same as them committing to the project, I have found. And it puts me in a strange position that I applied for this grant thinking I was doing a good thing, and then the departments blame you for saddling them with extra work. And it didn't help that we had a culvert collapse on one of our main roads right next to the rail trail because of the construction. So that set the DPW back a little further. But I think for the next phase, we are definitely getting more buy-in from the department heads. And so they can't point their finger at me, basically.
Okay, well, thank you so much, everybody. Those were really interesting insights, I think, from a diversity of types of places and types of projects. Jen, where should we go from here?
I was just saying I'm still here, but I was muted. No, that was really, really excellent. I think it might be a good chance actually to move into maybe some audience questions. Might be a good time to do that. But before we do, I did want to pause for a second and sort of reflect and share and do some polls for our audience. I think that's always really exciting. Get an idea of who's in the Zoom room today, who's at the event, and really sort of hone in on some of these aspects of shared streets projects. So I think, Sasha, if you are able to share the first poll, that would be really great. So our first poll question for the group here today is, what kind of shared streets project does your community need right now? We've talked a lot about sort of different projects that have come from different communities. Is it a main street project thinking about repurposed streets, plazas, and beyond? Reimagined streets, which is more the sidewalks, the bike lanes? Is it bus lanes, those dedicated bus lanes? Shared mobility, thinking about bike share programs? Or is it investments in the future? Have you already done some excellent temporary projects that now you're looking to make more permanent? We're going to give everybody a few more seconds to sort of answer these poll questions and then share them back out. This is very, I don't know if anyone's ever been on the other side of a poll coming in, but it is actually very, very exciting.
There's a lot of anticipation.
The anticipation's killing me. It's, oh man. Maybe we'll give it just 10 more seconds. I see some people creeping into the responses. And yeah, maybe we can call it, Sasha, and sort of share out the responses. So it looks like a lot of you are thinking about reimagined streets, sidewalks, bike lanes, and beyond. But not that far behind is main streets, those repurposed plazas, community spaces, streets. That's pretty exciting. Pretty low on the bus lanes. That's all right. And a few votes here and there for shared mobility and investments in the future. So that was our first poll question, which I think is always really interesting to, again, tell who's in the room, what are you thinking about, what brought you here today? And then we have another poll question, a really quick one. And this one is really related actually to that last one, is if your community has already started doing shared streets project, wherever you might be coming from today, have you explored making those more permanent? So we have a few options here. You've already done it, you're considering it, we decided not to at this time, or you do not have a shared streets project, and that is okay too. Give everybody a minute to answer. Oh, I think it actually just closed.
And I can relaunch if you'd like.
Oh, I think I got it. I don't know if we can relaunch.
I can relaunch it if you'd like.
Yes, yeah, let's relaunch it really quick. I think we have about 69 people, and we have close to 126 people on the call right now. So maybe we can get a few more votes in there.
Folks, if you did vote already, if you could just vote one more time on this poll, it'll start as new. Thank you.
All right, let's run that for a full minute again. Again, very exciting to see it on the back end. I will give a spoiler. We are considering it is leading right now, which is pretty exciting, I think, for a group of shared streets enthusiasts to hear that you have made these projects, whether they were temporary or always intended to be permanent, but are now really thinking about changing your communities and your streets. Let's run that for another 10 more seconds. All right, and let's end it right there. And we can look at the results. I think as I suspected, we are considering it led pretty far ahead, but not that far behind was that we already have, which is even better. So it's really exciting. So I think we wanted to pose those questions to you to also just get into the mindset of asking these panelists some questions. So at this point, we know we have some great questions in the chat already, and I'm happy to read those out loud. So Kate, you can get them to the right folks. Or if you would like to raise your hand and ask a question in person, we will unmute you and then you will be able to do that. So given that I don't see anybody raising their hands just yet, I am going to go straight into the chat questions. Just looking right here. I know, oh, yeah, we do have a question. Great, Thomas, go for it.
Hi, hello?
Yes, Thomas, we can hear you. Yeah, if you want to
okay.
say your name and what town you're
Hi,
from.
I'm Tom Branham. I'm in Framingham, Massachusetts. And I previously served when we were still a town on the Bike and Pedestrian Advisory Committee and the Cochituate Rail Trail Committee. And I also served on the Downtown Crossing Task Force. And there are a lot of situations where we have considered community projects, particularly for the downtown region, that could benefit from this style of approach. But at the same time, we have this problem in Framingham where the community is in several places cut in half by these kind of hard barriers like the train line, the turnpike, Route 9. And so they form these east-west blocks that have hard separations with tiny pores that open through them. So we had discussed in the Downtown Crossing Task Force the need for more of a mesh style approach to providing places that could cross and break up the patterns for traffic. Can anyone comment on dealing with this kind of restriction of wanting to put in place improvements on a corridor, but also finding that that corridor is a bottleneck towards traffic that needs to flow through? Thank you.
I wonder if maybe that's a question that could be good either for Ben and or for Wayne, who are dealing with pretty major corridors with their projects. I think in general, this is kind of the core, right, of the shared streets, both philosophy and challenge, which is that, you know, it is intentionally pushing back on vehicular traffic. And I think testing all of us a little bit to understand how much capacity really is required for vehicles. Is it what we've always assumed, or can we maybe get by with less, either because more is there than is needed or because people can move using other means? But Wayne, Ben, or other folks, maybe, do you have some thoughts on this key question?
Yeah, I don't know the Framingham challenges enough to comment on the specifics, but I mean, just generally, you know, space that's really activated is the space that's going to attract people. So what are the things that where those barriers are that get people to go from one side of the barrier to the other? And that's too specific, whether it's, you know, pop-ups for retail or whether it's pedestrian enhancements. That's the part I don't know, but just how do you get people to want to be there that other people follow it?
I know one of the issues we have is, for example, people in Ashland would like to reach the Mass Turnpike. And for them, traversing down 126 through the downtown, it's an essential flow. So if we cut that off or impinge on that, it's certain to cause problems, not just for us as far as backups, but for the communities around us in being able to access the proper flow of people and goods.
I think Framingham's has some really unique challenges because of the road rail interface and what that means for the kind of immediate region. But yeah, I think it's a really key question that applies to other places as well. Other folks on the panel, or maybe even anybody else, have thoughts on this question?
I'd be happy to chime in as well. You know, the city of Chelsea, one of our major sort of political pushbacks on a combined bus and bike lane is that it effectively eliminates one lane for vehicular traffic in a really dense downtown area of Chelsea. To date, we have not witnessed like the catastrophic major impacts to congestion that a lot of the council and some other community members were anticipating. And I think that that's a function of a few different things. I think that it's a function of just how traffic does end up working out. It does flow sort of like water through pipes, and either through learned behaviors or just through, time and sort of synchronization of traffic at the local level, it does tend to ameliorate itself. As a planner, we're taught that, geometric configurations that restrict the width of a roadway or eliminate a lane, those are not necessarily going to create these long-lasting impacts to congestion. But the other thing that's important to recognize is that putting in a new lane as well, even if, let's just say hypothetically, there's not even enough space, that doesn't ameliorate congestion either. There's lots of other ways to ameliorate congestion. I think that those are probably through modal shifts, through sort of less people driving single occupancy vehicles. So I do appreciate that concern, absolutely. I actually live in Davis Square in Somerville, and they put in a lot of their bump outs for outdoor dining. And, it did create a lot of, congestion issues for that particular corridor. It probably increased the travel time through there about, I would say, 2 minutes, depending on who's crossing the street and who's not. But I think that at the end of the day, it's sort of a philosophical question that we have to reconcile with. It's sort of, what is the added benefit to the community via these bump out spaces or via these bike lanes from environmental standpoints, or maybe there's, congestion issues caused by it that you need to weigh. So it's sort of this broader framework, I think, and I think honing in on just the congestion doesn't necessarily do the proper amount of due diligence to really reconcile what the issue might be. So it might work in some cases, it might work well in others. But I think giving it a lot of time to see how things sort of sift out is the most important thing. And then revisiting it, especially with things like these temporary improvements, and really discussing them at the community level is the best way to sort of go about it. But I don't want, worries about congestion to predicate projects like this that could have really long lasting benefits to a community as well.
Indeed, of course. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions, other folks?
Great. We're getting a ton of questions in the chat, Kate, and also a few people that are raising their hands. I'm going to try and switch between the two to be fair to people who are camera shy. We did get a question in the chat of how are folks getting creative to ensure community engagement is a part of all of our projects, especially when it comes to reaching out to Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities.
So I'll quickly speak for MassDOT here, because as I mentioned, this was something that we thought about a lot in the summer, not specifically from an equity perspective, but just very broadly on sort of what were we going to require as a funder that the funded municipalities had done or did do in terms of public outreach. And typically when we do our own projects or we look to fund municipal projects, we have a really high bar for public involvement. And actually the first draft of the application that we did had a whole section about, tell us what you've done on public involvement. And as part of our sort of like overall challenge to ourselves to sort of let go and trust that municipalities were going to do what they needed to do within their own local context. And if they didn't, that the kind of feedback loop of opposition would go, would spring into action quickly enough that it would create sort of a change at the local level. We ultimately decided to not ask anything really around public involvement. In the current phase of the program, which some folks may have seen, we actually do have a few kind of basic questions about it, which was a result of a lot of this conversation in the first round. There's obviously been a lot of discussion nationally about shared streets and equity and how you get the public involved in something that sort of by necessity has to be quick and tactical, and particularly if it's temporary. But I guess I have no grand conclusion other than that there can be a conflict between in-depth public involvement and something that you want to have happen fast. And I actually don't know how to resolve that, either as a citizen who sometimes wants a lot of process or as a professional who sometimes wants no process. So I'm just curious to know what others think.
Well, I'll start. So this is Wayne from Northampton. I mean, I think, we had planned to do this project even before COVID, totally different scale, would have been smaller. And part of the reason we wanted to do it was exactly this question. It's all about community engagement. No matter how many public meetings we get, even when we go to public housing projects, even when we go to concentrations of poverty, we don't engage people as deeply as when we do a demonstration project. So we did a one-day demonstration project, I don't know, 3 years ago with a previous consultant, and we just narrowed down part of the street and did a temporary bike lane, and we had, various outdoor things, and we had, one volunteer came and cooked quesadillas. And I would say it wasn't like a formal engagement, but we just chatted with people and they came for the quesadillas, and we had a greater diversity of people, frankly, than we ever get in a public meeting. So to us, the shared streets that's the engagement. It's not necessarily the preparation ahead of time, which we didn't do. It's the process itself. That's the core to me about lighter, quicker, cheaper, is these are pretty small, not criticizing MassDOT's amount of money, but these are pretty small dollars compared to permanent changes. And so we get to engage people in the process.
I can add that I think the age of COVID is a perfect chance to use Zoom too, to do citizen engagement. Much easier than finding a venue and conducting a night meeting outdoors. I think people are more willing to attend Zoom meetings too. At least that's my experience. And so, not for phase 1, but for phase 2, we've already had we had to send out flyers to all the neighbors to the phase 2 of the rail trail, and we've already conducted that meeting. And as far as the rail trail, actually, it's included in our bicycle pedestrian network plan, and there was a lot of citizen engagement involved in that, and also in our master plan that we just finished. So we did do a lot of citizen engagement even before we applied.
Yeah, and I in some ways I agree with what you say about Zoom, but I think that created some challenges also for other portions of the population. We have a large group of older residents that technology has been an issue, and has been an issue throughout. It really highlighted our issues throughout the whole COVID pandemic, and so I think you have to try and be creative. And I think, as Catherine said, that with any quick launch project, community engagement is very difficult. Add COVID on top, it makes it more difficult. It really has to become a priority if you want to make it work. You have to, probably invest a little bit more time than you normally would with another project to really get out there and get the community informed.
I think Chief Galvin sounds more like a planner than most planners.
We'll welcome him to our ranks. There's always room for more planners.
Wrong retirement group.
That is true. That is definitely true.
So we have I want to switch over to some folks who have had their hands raised. Thank you for being patient. I think if we look at the order in which people had their hands raised, Ricardo, you were first. If you want to unmute yourself, or I think someone might have to unmute you, you can ask your question.
Hi there. Can everyone hear me? So similar to some of the communities that have spoken here, we in the city of Pittsfield, Ricardo Morales, I'm the Commissioner of Public Services for the city of Pittsfield. So in the city, we had a lot of emergency type powers given to the mayor and the administration, and that allowed us to develop quickly and implement quickly without really asking for following the formal process that we normally would have to follow. Now we're facing all right, we're probably going to stay in the interest of sticking with some of these pilot programs and making them permanent. We need to implement them the right way, in a sense, right? So my question is, what in doing so, in that process, from this panel, is there any word of wisdom, anything that you already are doing that you think would be a good path to move and steps to follow to get that going? I'll end it there. I think it gets the question I wanted to ask across.
Anybody? That's a tricky one, but interesting. Either on the panel or otherwise. Ricardo, I think you stumped us. I don't know, anybody from MAPC, are there things you can speak to related to this issue? Unless we've lost everybody. Ricardo, why don't you and I touch base separately, because this is definitely something we've thought about as well.
Sorry about that. Still here. Yes, that sounds like a good idea. I'm also looking at the chat here, and it looks like, it's interesting. We have a lot of questions coming in the chat that people are answering amongst communities as we go. So in that case, I'm actually going to go back to another person who has their hand raised, who has not spoken yet. Erica Larner, if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question.
Let me see. Hi, I'm hoping that I'm being heard at the moment. Yeah, my name is Erica Cross. I'm the Conservation Administrator with the town of Belchertown, Western Mass, Pioneer Valley. And I'm interested in any kind of suggestions people might have for how they might interpret this in a rural setting without the main streets idea. We had an interesting moment where we pursued a shared streets grant in the fall. It was successful. We've put in improved crossing and signage for a rail trail across a difficult road, and people are thrilled about it. And one of the things that we're looking at is that when we sent out an update survey for our open space and recreation plan, we realized that with over 400 respondents, 46% of them say they use our open space lands to commute already in some way, shape, or form. And in our head, having a concept of encouraging people to permanently use our trail systems to get to centers of commerce and school systems, I'm wondering, it's probably non-traditional and not on par with what a lot of the cities are imagining. What's something that we could do to make sure that we're really still addressing the same concerns, or has anyone had experience with that different approach towards not using streets?
I would say from our perspective in Berlin, it's very similar as we look at our Complete Streets program. That's what a lot of our Complete Streets is looking to address, is how we can connect our open spaces. So I think that may be a project avenue to look at, is look at those areas you have and how you can interconnect them to allow people to travel to areas of commerce. That's exactly what we're looking to do with our Complete Streets program. We have a robust conservation program. We have lots of protected land, lots of trails, but we have no sidewalks to connect those areas. So as we look to the future, that's what we're going to be looking for projects.
And I can say for MassDOT, the addition of an emphasis area on safe access to open spaces and parks arose out of a completely random meeting that I had with some of my colleagues who work in our environmental secretariat, who were just sort of talking about how, like, we needed better ways to connect people to open spaces and parks. And I was like, well, we have this method. But we certainly saw more applications than I might have expected that weren't on conventional streets, but were trail connections. They were using existing plazas. They were using parking areas. They were, connecting ball fields and recreation areas and hiking trails, all kinds of things. So certainly we're happy to talk to you separately or connect you with the technical assistance team if that would be helpful.
Yeah, I may reach out afterwards, and I appreciate hearing that you've actually had more applications being creative in that thinking, because having submitted things, wondering if I'm the only person out there and I'm just that I'm the crazy one, or if that this is something that other people are seeing, because I was shocked to hear that 46% of people were already using our open space lands to commute. And I don't know what it would have been like pre-pandemic, but it'd be nice to maintain that post-pandemic. So thank you very much for that. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And we're always looking for ways to leverage recreation infrastructure for transportation and vice versa. There are a lot of benefits to doing so.
Great.
Great. I think we have time for one more question, and feel free to keep asking things on the chat. I think we have some facilitators from our peer exchange also answering some privately, and we'll leave our contact information as well. I think Chris Hayes from Lowell, I believe, is going to have the stage for the last question. So Chris, if you want to unmute yourself.
Hi, thanks. This question is kind of related to kind of the first question that happened, which, Wayne was talking about how maybe the outreach wasn't so successful, but also kind of the pilot is supposed to be the outreach. The demonstration project is supposed to be the outreach. And I am wondering how we can better advertise that, get feedback on that. I think Chief Galvin also kind of mentioned that, the neighbors really didn't say anything until they saw it, which is great. But then the response is negative. How do you actually kind of put that in a constructive, constructive criticism phase rather than a let's tear it down phase? I'd like to know more about that. And there's another question, if Chief Galvin is going to answer that, which I thought in the chat was amazing, which is how do you convince fellow police departments that these might be good ideas?
I was actually starting to type a response to that. So, in terms of the project and the negative response and kind of the tear it down, you have to look for the positive that was in that negative, because that's really what came out of it for us. As much as there was, hey, we don't want to see our town center change at all. But then there was a lot of and it's taking those constructive criticism from it to apply it to something in the future. Because I really took a lot of good ideas about what we can do with the Route 62 corridor and improving safety. And I think in that transitions into what I can say to other police chiefs and planners. That comment mentioned or question mentioned response times. If we're making our streets safer, we're going to limit our responses, one, but also, you're going to create safer passageways for our police and fire responses as well. I understand where other public safety officials would be concerned if sometimes we're narrowing roadways. But if we're slowing traffic down and calming traffic in other ways, ultimately that should make our responses to emergencies safer and make our roads safer in general.
I'll also say on the pilot point, when we started the grant program, we really expected that practically all of the applications we got were going to be for temporary things, and that we'd be lucky to get, some lanes dedicated for the course of the summer or whatever. So I think we have been surprised at how many municipalities were interested in jumping right to permanent installations. It's great. I totally embrace it. But I do think when you're talking about things that are temporary versus things that are permanent, the threshold for public involvement does go way up. And I think that the onus is on municipalities, and this is easy for me to say because I don't have to do it, but even when something is temporary, to do public outreach and messaging that assures people that it is temporary and that we put this here precisely because we want to get your feedback and we want to see how it works and we want to see if it's safe and see how people use it. And, that's a challenge always. It's especially a challenge right now, but I think just from what I've seen, that's a big piece of that. If you say that, it lowers people's blood pressure way down, and then you can have a conversation.
To a point, sometimes people, they lost that. They didn't want to hear it. They saw a change, they heard a change. And that was a message that I tried to convey throughout the project, that if this doesn't work and it becomes a real problem, we can move in the middle. We actually did make some tweaks to the project as it went on because we saw that certain portions weren't working right. And because of the temporary nature, we were able to do that. And that's what we try to explain in our meetings, in our follow-up meetings, is that if this were a permanent project, to move granite and asphalt and concrete isn't an easy thing to do. Through a pilot program like this, you're able to do things and experiment and see how they work.
So I think can we try and fit in one more question, maybe? All right. I know, folks, it's dark out, so maybe this is more fun inside. So Jeffrey Roth, if you want to unmute yourself and then just say where you are and where you're from and ask your question.
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much. I live in Belmont. I'm just a individual resident. And I guess, yeah, I'm just really interested in the Shared Streets program. What is the plan for funding for, new applications and stuff for this coming year? Is MassDOT going to be re-implementing the program and allowing municipalities to apply for new programs? And do you know when that might be?
So I just put some information about this in the chat. I grew up in Belmont, and I was thrilled to see what was done on Leonard Street this summer. When I lived in Belmont in the 80s and 90s, you couldn't change, a brick without everybody flipping out. So it's awesome to see. So we're actually making grants right now. We've got the programs open for several more months. We have at least 2 more rounds of applications that we're accepting. So please, please, please apply. I would like to think that the program is successful enough and popular enough that we will continue to be gifted money by the Commonwealth to keep doing this, but I can't promise that. So please do consider getting in applications. We have a round at the end of this month and a round at the end of next month. And I or others on the team can certainly answer questions and help get you over the hump of doing an application if that would be helpful.
Great. That seems like probably the perfect question to end on, that there is still continued opportunity to think about shared streets projects in your communities. So I want to thank everybody who was a panelist today for just sharing your experience. I want to thank Kate for moderating, and also all the folks who facilitated in our earlier hour too, and also attended, and everyone who was here today. Thank you again so much. I'm going to drop my email in the chat, and anyone else who's happy to answer questions, feel free to do the same. But that is the end of our program today. Thank you so much for coming. And it sounds like we have some good follow-up to do as well already.
Thank you so much, everybody. This is great. Please, please keep being part of this movement. And thank you, Jen, for guiding us through. Thanks, everyone.